you for joining us tonight. It's really great to see such a full room. My name is Katie Metzler. I'm the Associate Vice President of Product Innovation at Sage Publishing. And I'm really happy to be here chairing tonight's event. So before we start, we thought we'd trial a bit of audience participation. So those who have been here for a while staring at the screen will have seen there is a Menti code here. How many of you have tried Menti before? It's becoming pretty commonplace in university campuses all over, I think, so hopefully you know the drill. So if you could go to menti.com on your phone and then enter this code here, 49365. And then we've got a question for you, and that is, how would you describe your profession or your discipline? So are you, for example, a social scientist? Do you consider yourself to be a data scientist? Perhaps you think of yourself as a geographer or a computer scientist. We just wanted to get a flavor of what the audience makeup is tonight. Oh, God, I love these titles. Data and People Bridger. Bridge Builder, there's a couple of those. Engineer, innovator, social scientist, accelerator. And I'm glad to see social data scientist up there, since that's what the event's about. It'd be a bit awkward otherwise. Yeah, great. Okay, so that's great. We just wanted to encourage early participation. This is going to be an informal panel. So we're hoping that people will get involved, ask questions. So before I pass over to our co-host, Victoria, to tell us a little bit about Researchers Code, I just want to tell you a little bit about Sage and why we're putting on this event tonight. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sage, we're an independent academic publisher. And we believe, passionately believe, that education and research, and particularly research and education in the social sciences, has the power to create a more just society. And social science research is changing, like everything around us is changing as a result of new technology. And so recently we launched Sage Ocean, which is an initiative to support social science researchers who are engaging with big data, or social data scientists, or computational social scientists, or whatever term you prefer to use. And we've done that because we believe that at a time where there's more data available than ever before about human behavior, and a growing number of new tech and tools to help us make sense of it all, we believe that social science really has to have a critical voice at helping to ensure that we use that data to improve society. And so, as part of Sage Ocean, in our efforts to advocate for the social scientists, and to support the future of social science research, we put on events like this to get people together, to network and to share their ideas, to form new research partnerships, and to discuss key issues and challenges facing social scientists. And so tonight's event is focused on equality in social data science. And so though the title of the event refers to gender equality, we certainly don't want to limit the discussion to being about gender. And as I mentioned, it's a kind of panel Q&A, so we're going to keep presentations short and leave lots of times for questions and networking after. Kind of why this topic and why now? So I have my answer for this, but you'll all have your own answers for this, and that's why you showed up tonight. So I hope you're going to tell us why you showed up tonight in the Q&A. And so for me, I think gender equality in social data science means that we need to talk about gender equality in academia. We know that there is still gender pay gap in academia, and some have taken strong measures to correct this. So we have a couple of people from Essex University here tonight. And for example, Essex in 2016 realized that there was a gender pay gap in female professorial salaries, and so they took the measures of making a one-off pay increase for all their female professors. Talking about gender equality in social data science also means talking about representations of women in tech and attitudes towards women in tech. And it means confronting those, unfortunately, stubborn prejudices that exist that women can't code or women can't do stats. And so it means having a discussion about how this new community of thought and practice that is forming here around social data science has a chance to look different than the communities of practice of the past. And in particular, it seems really vital to challenge ourselves to do that, because of the questions social data scientists are asking and the methods that they're using, because of the danger of biased algorithms or reinforcing inequality through policies based on big but flawed data. And so while we're not going to fix it tonight, our panelists are here to talk about their experiences of becoming social data scientists with the hopes of inspiring us all to working to create a more diverse and a more equal community for us and for each other. So we're going to start off, like I said, with a brief intro from Victoria Carr from Researchers Code, who are our co-hosts for tonight's event, and she's going to tell you more about the important work that their organization is doing.
Great, thank you very much. Is this on? Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm Victoria Carr, and I am the founder of Researchers Code. So first of all, I'm absolutely delighted that Researchers Code are collaborating with Sage Ocean to give you this incredible event. I'd also like to say thank you to Chris, who actually reached out to us a couple of months ago proposing this event, and we realized actually that we aligned on a lot of our aims and missions. So that was fantastic. So as well as doing Researchers Code, I'm also a PhD student at King's College London, and I'm also based at the Alan Turing Institute as well. I tweet a lot on women in tech, diversity tech, and technology in general. So if you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter at @VictoriaCarr_. I don't know where the underscore went, but there's an underscore after Carr. So Researchers Code, who are we? So we're an international community that supports cis, trans women and non-binary individuals in technology and research. So when I talk about research, I mean all sorts of disciplines from biotechnology to social data science. So when we started, we actually had quite a STEM bias, and we had a lot of engagement, particularly with people who are working in mathematics, in biotechnology, in chemistry, physics. But then actually events like this and kind of our recent engagement have shown that we've got a lot of social scientists who are very interested in engaging with our community, which is fantastic. So how do we go about supporting these individuals? So first of all, we run workshops and events in London. So our workshops tend to be quite technical, quite skill-focused. So we work on things like how to get started with Linux, how to learn GitHub as well. But we also have events that are quite general for upskilling in terms of creating a personal website, your personal brand, also writing Wikipedia articles on women in tech. And also we ran a panel event with Entrepreneur First for PhD students who are interested in starting their own companies as well. As well as trying to upskill these individuals, we also try to showcase these individuals through various means. So our first one is we run a podcast. We host a podcast interviewing women who are pioneering in technology and research. And actually, two of our speakers tonight have featured on our podcast previously, which is very, very great. And thank you for coming back to us again. So you can find it on researcherscode.com/podcast. And you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcasting platforms you may use. I would also like to say thank you to my co-host, who is stuck on that picture because she was the one who actually took the photo in the first place. So I've had to paste her face into that photo. Another thing we do as well is a Twitter takeover. So every week we host a women in their early career of research who are using technology for their research. So it's really fun. We host a variety of different people from different disciplines, from geography. I think we've got someone who works in meteorology at the moment, social data science, obviously. So if there's one thing you do tonight, follow us on @ResearchersCode, and you'll be able to marvel at the wonderful gifts and advice and polls and things that they put up. It's been fantastic. You can also check out our previous contributors as well at researcherscode.com/Twitter-contributors. We also run a blog as well on our Medium page, and this is just a more kind of permanent way to showcase our researchers, early career researchers. And I've put this fantastic photo of a physicist who works at CERN who is quite literally karate kicking her way into making a difference in academia. So they're fantastic articles. I would really recommend them. So you can follow us at medium.com @ResearchersCode as well. All of this wouldn't be possible without the wonderful help of our volunteers. And our volunteers are primarily PhD students and postdocs who give away their time to make this community as it is now and helping more other people. So I'd like to say again, special thanks to Olat, my co-host on the podcast, and also to Naomi as well, who's done an absolute stellar job at organising our Twitter contributors. So just to wrap up, you can find all this information on researcherscode.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at researcherscode, and you can read our blog on Medium as well. And with that, I will pass over to our speakers and the rest of it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. And my first question to the panel, and if everyone could answer this, and then we'll open it up to the room, is on the question of what we can all do in our various environments to promote inclusion. So in academia, what do you think we could do better? In the startup world, which you hear a lot of stories that suggest they haven't got it quite right all the time either. And in the charity sector, I'd be equally interested in your view on that. So do you mind just doing a quick answer on that? And then we'll sort of throw it open to the room to ask any questions, either about the substantive or the methodological or the question of inclusion in social data science.
So in my field, in academia, I guess, there are different ways in which we can increase inclusion. One is through recruitment of students, or recruitment of faculty, for example, right? And I think I think the best approach for this is to have more complex criteria for accepting people, to put accomplishments in context, and to focus on potential rather than past achievement, which if we're talking about kind of a long history of disadvantage, or not talking only about gender, but other aspects, socioeconomic aspects, right? The only way to go forward is to kind of look at the potential rather than the past achievements. In my own little way, I've been trying to push for this, both in recruitment and also for acceptance of students. And I also agree with James in terms of course, teaching. So I also do something very similar where our department, the Department of Methodology, we are focusing on exactly teaching students who have no statistical mathematical background. And that's pretty much our mission, that we believe that especially computational methods are available to everyone. And the way at least I look at it is that computational methods, I know a lot of, there are different aspects of it, but I think that it's going to they're separate from mathematics, right? So it's completely possible to actually not be good at maths, but actually be a good programmer, right? And that's what I'm trying to encourage our students. And it is true that we do get a lot of very concerned, qualitative, kind of minded students who are very intimidated by computational methods. It's our mission to try to welcome everyone and to make everything accessible to everyone.
So I think the startup world is really interesting because startup tech really doesn't have that many women in it. It's just even worse than tech in general. And I think, I don't know, I've hypothesized with my friends, but like some of it is that people don't understand the risks they're taking. Mm-hmm. So there's a few questions that you can ask a startup to understand how risky they are. And the startup I'm in right now is not that risky because I grilled them and I knew the questions I was supposed to ask. And I think that's the problem, is everybody hears the word startup, they get scared, they kind of just go, that's not my thing. And the other thing is that when startups advertise, they can accidentally use words that might not attract like a diverse type of group of people, because they tend to be entrepreneurs. They'll be like, yes, we want this like get up and go, person. They might use language that might, maybe it hints that they're looking for some like aggressive male data scientist. And it's just by accident. It's because they're just using language that's kind of common in the startup world. So I think language that's used when recruiting people is really important. Luckily, where I work, they're just really lovely, and I actually have a really good lifestyle. Like, it's not the crazy startup world at all. They're just amazing. But I do advise them on subtle things. So, for example, in the tech world, they have the technical tasks that you always have to do when you're applying for a job. That could be 4 hours long. That doesn't really work if you're a primary caretaker. How can you find 4 hours free for like 5 different job interviews? So I say, I've also, tell people when I'm working with them and they're recruiting, you know, just be mindful of that. You know, can you cut down the task to an hour, and then maybe you'll have a diverse group of people actually applying for you. So these like really subtle things like language or the tasks or things that you do might accidentally discriminate, and people are not even aware of that. So I think those are things to be mindful of.
I can talk for the social sectors and the non-profit sector a bit, but I'm probably better placed talking more broadly for the data science community that we interact with. So that's data scientists in industry coming to us, and then the data scientists in the social sector who we support and kind of continue to work with. But for both those groups and with data science in general, we come back to this, the well-trodden path that the pipeline matters and that it's really leaky in data science. So we'll try and create, we've got these data ambassador roles. They're basically like team leader roles in our big projects, and we'll try always to make sure that they are very diverse in along all the axes that we can. But it's that even in itself is hard, because we're taking these roles from our core community, and our core community is taken from our wider community, and that is taken from the data science community, and it is mostly guys. So that's why I want to turn to things like your not only the course that you've started, but your attitude to it, and say that's absolutely wonderful. And that kind of, I guess, links to my second point, which we should acknowledge broad entry routes and broad skill sets. So I didn't used to call myself a data scientist, even though it's exactly what I was, because I was working in government and then in think tanks. I was like, oh, I'm a researcher, I'm a political analyst, I'm a policy analyst, maybe I'm a data analyst at best, I'm not a data scientist. And actually it was a guy who convinced me that I needed to drop that particular bias towards myself. So it's recognizing that actually we are a very broad church, and kind of to be inclusive of people, even if they don't have necessarily the confidence to kind of assign themselves that label. But also on the other side, to recognize that particularly doing data science in the social sector, that broad set of skills that you might bring from having done other disciplines or having worked in other sectors or other jobs is really valuable. The most useful part of, in particular in the social sector, where you're a small team, potentially a team of one, doing data science, that the most useful skills you can have is to be able to essentially understand where your work fits in, and kind of maneuver appropriately to make sure that data-driven decision-making is becoming kind of operationalized and all that stuff. So welcome broad entry points and broad skill sets. And then probably a third point, which maybe is more contentious, but I feel I would be letting down the side if I didn't mention this when talking about gender in data science and tech, is that this concept of being an ally. And we'll often, they'll go to panels that are, for example, all male, and there'll be these wonderful men on these panels, but I'll talk to them about the fact that they chose to do a panel that was all men, and they don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I do. I think that there is a great role for anyone who isn't at one time in their life or other in the majority group, in the privileged group, to be an ally for those who are underrepresented or otherwise having a hard time. And sometimes that can mean moving aside, and that's very hard. So I guess a plea for us all to do that a bit more.
Yeah, great. Thank you. James?
I think everything's been said.
Great. And actually, I'll just mention something that Sage is struggling actually with a lot of the same issues. And we've got I co-opted Dave, who works at Sage, to talk just really briefly about some of the things that we've done around getting more women in IT in our business, which for us is a huge challenge as well. So do you want to just say, is there a mic that you can use quickly? Like some of the practical things that we've done to change recruitment practices, for example.
Yeah, and that's one of the good examples, actually. So, we recognised quite some time ago that we had a problem in technology at Sage with regards to gender diversity. So, the fact that I'm kind of talking about it says something about it, because I sort of headed up the Women in Technology initiative, because we didn't have any other any women in leadership roles in technology. So, that was a couple of years ago, and we've now got a really good team that I work with that are working on various initiatives, and we're sort of focusing on several areas, so recruitment, progression and retention are the kind of separate areas that we're working on. The major focus has been in the area of recruitment, so we're sort of introducing lots of different things that we're through research we're identifying as things we haven't done well in the past. So, for example, we are making sure that we have diverse panels who are doing the interviews. We're making sure that we're working with recruitment agencies who are motivated to provide us with diverse slates of candidates. We're looking at language, which was mentioned in our job adverts and our job descriptions. We're using a tool called Textio, which is a language augmentation application that checks the unconscious bias within the language of the job adverts that we're putting out there. We are putting in place lots of things that we think can make a difference when it comes to ensuring that we're getting a diverse slate of candidates when we're doing recruitment. And we're now sort of starting to see that there is a difference in the number of women and the diversity in general of the recruits that we're getting for roles in technology.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions now. So we've got a microphone here. Does anyone want to ask any questions to anyone on our panel?
I guess I'll ask the question.
Okay, great, thank you.
So can you talk about a challenge or something that you perhaps post the event or post the situation you realized that, well, maybe there was a bias going on there, and how did you handle it?
Oh, it's a tough one. Does anyone want to take that
Or
one?
how would you have liked to handle it?
I've got one. Just hopefully the person that, anyway, hopefully nobody will actually figure out where, this does not happen in the current job. But code reviews. Code reviews are really, really difficult things to go through. So if anybody hasn't been through a code review, then you're very lucky. So a code review, if you haven't heard about it, it's basically you develop a bit of code and then somebody else reviews it for you. Now, this can have some issues if basically what's really important, I think, for a company is to establish some guidelines on how to do a code review in a nice, friendly manner and to be constructive. Because I once had a young male, a little bit on the aggressive side, just basically review my code. And he was really not friendly and really not cooperative. And I found that to be very difficult because I was actually very keen to learn how to code better. So I thought I was being open, and then it got to be very tense and really and it wasn't even his fault. It was because the company just didn't think about the fact that it was important to have guidelines to teach somebody that's young, that hasn't actually had any experience collaborating with people, how to do something very difficult in a friendly manner. So I actually blame the company really for that. So basically, and it took a lot of time to basically to tell the company that this is really important. We need guidelines. And eventually, after lots of just kind of pushing people, I finally got them to write some guidelines and to basically make sure it's a collaborative way. I get along with that person that I didn't get along with before now. Hopefully they don't actually watch this video though. But but that was a tricky situation. Yeah.
And I second that. I've had an analogous situation where this upfront saying this is how we treat each other and don't tolerate behaviour that is subpar, but please do tolerate the difference, and saying that upfront and saying it over and over again, and making sure that people who are respected and quite senior in the room say it has made a massive difference in scenarios where I've faced similar problems.
Great. Any questions from the audience? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if any of you have ever seen any kind of bias, particularly with regard to gender expressing itself in sort of data science methodologies. Just I'm thinking about, that book, Invisible Women. Is anyone? Yeah. So I'm just wondering if you've seen any of that take place.
Good question.
It doesn't have to be based on gender, but yeah.
I do not know the book, Invisible Women. Can someone maybe?
It's an ACE book. This is a bit of a shout out, actually, that we have a data ethics book club, and our last one was on that book. The next is an ACE book. The next one is, so that book club was AI and gender. The next one is AI and financial inclusion, which has had slightly fewer sign-ups, but will also be a hoot.
Do you want to do a one-sentence summary for those people who aren't familiar with the book? Yeah, just what the premise is, because I think it's a really great question.
So written by a woman called Caroline Criado Perez, and she's the person behind the campaign to get a female figure on the £10 note a while ago, which was successful. And she has had a hypothesis that we have a gender data gap. So actually, even when we're trying to understand how people of different genders might experience the world differently, or how the world might interact with them differently, that sometimes it's not even possible to understand those differences because we're not collecting sex-disaggregated data, or we're not doing things like testing drugs on both sexes. And her book is a very compelling proof that that hypothesis is correct. But to answer your question, I've got an example that isn't gender, that's ethnicity. So we worked with, I'll try and do this quickly because it's a bit of a context to it, but one of our projects was with a food bank up in Yorkshire, and they have, so food banks are sticking plasters, they are crisis support. If you keep coming back, something's wrong, the other services, perhaps your local council or whatever it may be, is not stepping in to get you out of whatever kind of pothole you've got trapped in. So if you are coming back 10 times to that food bank, not good. This particular food bank had fundraised enough cash for one support worker. But the problem was they had loads of people who were coming back many more times than they should be. So how do you get a queue for the support worker that's not infinite and that prioritises the people who are most likely to be in need? This, of course, from a data science perspective, is a wonderful question. You see if you can predict the risk of dependency and long-term reliance on this food bank. And it turns out that, very sadly, I think you can, with very good accuracy, predict the likelihood that someone's going to become reliant, i.e. that they're not being supported by other services in a timely manner. But what's interesting here about the variables we used is, so there's a few protected characteristics that under law it's not illegal to use in machine learning or AI context, but you just got to be careful about the implications of using them. And we were looking at country of birth and ethnicity in our model, and finding that they seem to be very strongly predicting dependency. And actually, we talked to the food bank, and we said, "Is this, you're working with these people, with your clients on the ground? What's happening here?" And said, "Oh well, I'm not sure. I kind of see that, and I'm surprised by that correlation." And actually, it turned out that it was essentially outliers. So there was a very small group of people who were turning the model crazy, and so we stripped it out, and it didn't have that characteristic was no longer dependent. But what we needed for that process to happen was the data scientists to talk to the subject matter experts who understood that because often in cases you'll say, "Oh, an outlier is actually useful for whatever reason, we'll leave it in." Actually, it wasn't in this case. They understood the context of why that was genuinely an outlier. So for us, the importance of checking the tech with the real life to strip out those biases is pretty important.
Other questions?
You've all talked very much about the sort of promise of data science, and you've talked about it in very positive terms. And I sort of hesitated to ask this question because I don't really know the details of the example I'm going to give. But there was a case in the United States where data science was being used to predict recidivism, I think, and sentencing. It's a very well-known case, isn't it? I'm sure you're all familiar with it. So, in a way, this is a kind of inevitable path, isn't it, when you use data that is out there, because biases are, built into the structure of our societies. So I'm wondering, how do you suggest that we, take this into account and also highlight this?
Another great question. Really important issue. Who wants to take that one? Yeah?
I think it's an issue in that, so recidivism issue was because obviously that the institutional racism built into the pre-existing social structures was meaning that they were training these models on an already biased system that tended to give higher or worse sentences to people of colour. And I think, I mean, in terms of my viewpoint, I don't think that there is necessarily a technical solution to this. It's a social solution. You need to have people that understand these systems so that they are technically trained, they understand actually what's going on under the hood. But they also need to have that background of critical thinking and awareness of these issues, and then to be positioned in spaces where they can actually have a say and actually say, you know, well, if you're going to use this data, it's incredibly biased, and therefore you're going to get incredibly biased results out, which is the motivation for me for getting more people from a vast range of backgrounds in these spaces, because then they can be the one that puts their hand up and says, hang on, that's a really bad idea.
I want to add to this. So, I mean, apart from the kind of the interpretation part, I mean, I think there is actually a technical solution, and actually, algorithmic bias is a huge area now that's really developing into that. And so, there are ways in which we can use data science to test for biases in conclusions made using data science, right? So there is a way to do this systematically and methodologically. And so to give an example, there is, for example, a number of researchers who are doing what is known as algorithmic auditing kind of studies, where they would, for example, go to Google or some job market, kind of online job markets, and audit in the sense that they would automatically use technology, and they would automatically say make queries and then look for biases in these systems, right? And so the idea is that we could use the same tools to data science to analyze all these, to find biases in the data, and then to hopefully also embed it in, say, the algorithms themselves to prevent them, right? So I think that there is both aspects. There is a technical solution. It might not be enough, and we definitely need. But I think that the field is pretty much aware of the problem and starting more and more to be aware of this. And so, yeah, you're right. It's not all bright pink future, and we are reaching a stage where we're working on it.
Just to add to that, I'd say that there should be, I think, and there currently lacks a push for transparency in the proprietary use of data science. So most of the example you're talking about is Compass. So they were a company that was brought in to create this recidivism algorithm, and a big part of the reason we know that it wasn't very good was because it was exposed by ProPublica and others and we saw that it wasn't fair, and that's the definition of fairness in data science is, or in mathematical terms, is very hard in itself. So that's a whole other kind of beehive to kick. But nonetheless, I think we can agree there was something wrong with the data science that was being applied there. We can, if the data that's being put in and the data that's being put out is anonymized and then shared with either the public or specific impartial interest groups, we can test to see if other algorithms are dodgy in that same way, to put it one way. And that transparency, I think, is absolutely vital, because what we see in any area of accelerating tech is that public policy doesn't keep up, legislation doesn't keep up. So actually, one thing that does keep up is the ability to apply some sunshine and get skilled people from industry or wherever to take a look and actually say this isn't quite right. And the other thing I wanted to touch on with that is the importance of what we're comparing it to. So I think when we looked at the ProPublica Compass example, a lot of people were like, oh, this is bias and this is bad decisions being made on bad data. That describes a system as it is. That describes humans, and I think actually we should be willing to have our own decisions put under scrutiny, as well as the decisions of computers. And in France, for example, they actually made it illegal to apply data science techniques to the decisions of judges, and moves like that scare me, because if we want to move towards a more just system, and if we don't even know where our baseline is, and we're just throwing out data science because it's kind of, it could be bad, then we're not. Yeah, how are we going to move to a better place?
There's a question at the
front.
I wanted to go back for the inclusive because I'm from Latin America and we don't have data scientists as much as we can have here. So when we were talking about being inclusive, how more about gender, how we're considering other countries that perhaps their data is not as structured as the data that we can find here. What are the challenges? Perhaps it's not highlight for your day-to-day, but at LSE, as being very international, what do you think are the challenges? Who are the responsible, like the nations? Now that I'm going back, how can I work towards that to be more inclusive?
Well, I don't have an answer, but I do think it's really important. So, for example, I mean, I was working on, looking at the connection between beautiful places and our well-being, and a lot of my data is based on in England because that's where the data is easy to find. And I did run a small study in Rio, but it was quite small scale because it's so important when we're coming to these kind of conclusions and we're applying it to the general public that we actually can apply it to general public. Because at the moment I could say my findings are probably biased towards Europe. And yet there are people applying it in all these different countries and it might actually not apply to them. And that's a bad thing. Yeah, so I don't know what the solution is. I would love to see more collaborations between different countries. Perhaps that should be encouraged more. Because at the moment, the countries that kind of work on their own, a bit siloed. Because, yeah, I mean, for social data science, that's the key.
Another question?
Yeah, you've got the mic, so did you have a question?
Yes, if I may. What is the risk in scenarios like your example with the food bank when talking to the subject matter expert is left out? And also, what is the risk when the human factor left out as the judges in France? And do you suggest any models to formalize that?
So what's the risk when the risk when the subject matter expert's left out and the risk when the human kind of understanding of human decisions making is left out? Bad tech, entrenching bias, providing services to the wrong people, or at least the people who don't need it the most, and in particular, not creating tech which becomes out of date quite quickly. So in the food bank example, we do capacity building, so we'll tell them about what we think is right to make, and then we will make it with them, so that when we wander away, they're down with the data science. So in that example, it was key for us that they understood the data the model was ingesting, so that when they look around them and they see that actually the communities that are coming to them are changing, they know that the model's not valid anymore because that model was trained on data which is no longer reflected in their clientele. So you don't do that step, and you might as well throw your model out because it's not. You don't know if it's relevant or not, and that's very dangerous. And I'd say the point about leaving out the understanding of human decision making, I guess it worries me that we throw out data, that we throw out biased or unfair data science readily, but don't throw out biased and unfair human systems of kind of control readily. So let's all go out and join XR. But I think there is there's in science a tendency to baseline and always want to understand what we change from and to, and we're not doing that when we move from human-based to partially or fully automated systems. And I think that's as a citizen, I think that's quite scary.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the human in the loop is really important. So even just in POPSA, so we're trying to automatically, discover photos to create a photo book. But if we did it all like algorithmically, it'd actually be quite boring for a person because the person's no longer involved. So they don't have ownership. So the ownership bit is really important. Even with a big organization, they're making social decisions. If a human's not involved, that person's not going to have ownership. They're going to be like, oh, the algorithm decided, won't care about biases. So I think that's very important to kind of still keep that link.
It's also quite important. I live in the world of research, so we have to take a few extra steps to actually have impact in the real world. But it's important as well not to have to miss out the field expert or the substantive expert in research as well, because otherwise you'll end up with bad research. I speak quite a lot with computer scientists in our university, and it's interesting because they are really enthusiastic about actually changing the world for the better. You know, this is actually, a lot of them are, they keep saying to me, if I didn't go into computer science, I'd be a social scientist. I'd be like, yes, great, because they want to change the world, and that's great. But as well, because they kind of get enthusiastic about projects, they sometimes run without actually thinking about what it is they are doing. And my favorite example was once one of our, I won't use names, but one of the people, he came to me and said, I want you to look at my survey because I'm getting some really interesting results. And it was about privacy habits, people's privacy habits online. You know, did they choose to use privacy tools that were available to them? And so they designed this kind of fake kind of online portal with a set of survey questions. And the idea behind their study was that the survey questions didn't really matter. What it was that there were actually privacy tools available in the browser for them to use to switch on. And these were like custom kind of privacy tools in like a little, you know, hamburger menu bar at the top. And it was just at the top of the screen. And he said to me, you know, we had some really interesting results because we ran this on 60 people and no one turned on the privacy settings. That means that no one is interested in their own personal privacy. And I said to him, well, how do you turn on the privacy settings? And he said, well, you click that button up there, and then you go to that menu, and then you go over here, and you click it on. And I was like, that's not even the settings in the actual browser that they're taking the test in. That's like an extra fake set of settings in your survey. And did you tell them that there would be privacy settings there? And they said, no. We just thought we'd see if they found them. And I said, why would you think they'd find them? And they're like, well, I asked everyone around me, and they said that that was a reasonable place to put them. And I said, well, most people in the real world, I mean, even if they are privacy conscious, even if I am privacy conscious, I would probably see that little menu and think to myself, well, this is kind of just part of the survey. That's not for me. I'm focusing on the survey. So even lacking that kind of substantive knowledge about people, you know, can be highly crucial in these areas.
To your comment about going back to Peru. So I've come from Bath tonight to this talk because it just seems really interesting. So thank you very much. It's been great. I'm training as a software developer in Bath. I went to a hackathon in Bristol a couple of weeks ago. They're developing a period dignity app, and they're using data that's open source, so our data in Bristol. And my question was really to think about is there a huge spectrum in how much data is available from sort of councils around the UK? So what you can do, how much open source data there is, and also internationally, do we know how much difference there is? Obviously, because you'll be needing the data when you go back. So I just didn't know if anyone had any sort of
good question.
help with that.
Do we have anyone working on open data, government open data here?
Well, I was working on open government data.
Perfect.
I guess it probably depends on how much money the country has. And when it comes to councils, London's got fantastic data. But if I want to find really good data on any, so I wanted to actually, explore my question beyond London. So of course, there's great countrywide data, there's great London data. But if you want to kind of go into a certain borough and kind of dig in, well, if they haven't invested the money, it's not there, and they probably don't have the money in the first place. So funding seems to really kind of bias where you actually find good data sets.
So for instance, at least in Latin America, and I guess in a lot of developing countries, what has happened is that there's a big and strong civil society pushing for government to open the data. So the investment, there might be investment in terms of the government, but what's really important in terms of that is to have really strong civil society pushing for it. So you might have really good quality data, even though the investment is not that big. I'm currently working for an organization actually that pushes government to publish procurement data. So we basically just support them technically, and then the government don't have to do that much investment. So it really, in terms of open data, it has to do a lot with the community built around it. So yeah, there's money involved, of course, but it really depends on the context.
Did you have a question? Yeah? Oh, I think the mic's gone the wrong way. Now you're going to have two mics.
I'm good with one. Hi, thank you for the panel. It was a really interesting discussion. My question is framed around a kind of example I'm going to give, but both the domain aspect and the gender aspect of the conversation we've been having today. Obviously, social data science we've seen draws from many different domains and also is kind of more accessible from different genders, ethnicities, so it's a really exciting place to be discussing these new topics. The example I wanted to draw on was a talk I was at the Royal Statistical Society a few months ago. They were having a question on what qualifies a data scientist, and the use case that they drew on was somebody who made a decision using a machine learning algorithm to reject or accept refugee status in the UK. And they said, or they alluded to the fact that that person had a domain in geography as the reason why that person was underqualified to use machine learning to dictate that decision-making process. Now, as a geographer myself, I found
you were offended.
Really, yeah, it was offensive both to the domain but also personally. But that would be why they centered the issue, regardless of whether AI should actually be used to justify such an important decision. And my question using that is, how should we qualify data scientists, and how do we make sure that the qualifications that we use to qualify data scientists are not biased towards certain domains, certain genders, and how do we invent new qualifications if that might be the case with currently, as there are kind of 3 PhDs up here. I guess you can have an interesting answer to that question.
That's a really nice question. I like that question a lot because I think you're absolutely right that what is a data scientist? We could have a whole other panel debate on, and there have been many of them. What does it mean to be a data scientist? Is a data scientist, can it even be a single person? Does it have to be a team? And there's all of these debates sort of going on. So without having been to that event, that does sound like a slightly dodgy statement about a geographer can't be a data scientist. What does it mean to be a data scientist, and what's the best training to become a data scientist, and who gets to be included in the category of data scientists?
Yeah. But so I want to talk about it. So what's missing actually in your question is it's about social data science, right? Because the example you gave was a social problem, right? And I would say that in this case, one could argue that the geographer is much more qualified to have, exactly this like human in the loop, right? Like added knowledge to bring into what a machine could predict than, say, a statistician who doesn't have any domain knowledge, right? And so I think that, especially in the topic of this panel, right, the social, we often forget about the social. And when we go to these kind of conferences, I go to a lot of kind of, computational social science conferences, and they're often kind of flooded by computer scientists, physicists, and often there is kind of no domain knowledge, and sometimes the findings are, at best not surprising. At worst they're actually wrong, right? Because people rely on, say, correlation only instead of thinking about, say, the behavioral model of what drives the result. And so I think that you need domain knowledge basically for a data scientist, and I think that could solve a lot of the problems about bias, for example.
Great. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up soon. So thank you all very much. If anyone else has any burning questions, I'm sure the panel would be very happy to take your questions over a drink. But I just want to finish by thanking everyone for coming, and also to do a little plug of our own, which is to say that Sage Ocean has a really active blog where we try to publish articles about all of these topics. So the methodological, the substantive, the issues around collaboration, talking about diversity in academia and in social data science. So we're always looking for contributors, and we are very open to a diverse range of contributors. So from academia and from the commercial sector, and we'd love it if you would write for us. And also, do stop by. I don't know if any of you spotted, but on your way out, we have t-shirts. They are pretty awesome. I encourage you all to grab one before they go. But please, would you all join me in thanking our panel for a really wonderful and stimulating discussion.